Hello, I'm Jeff Scher, and I'm here with Eduardo Lopez and Tatevik Mamikonyan, and we want to talk to you about interrogating power and transforming education with critical media literacy. We're in a time right now that's very different than anything we've experienced. In March of this year, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, tweeted out, he said, our common enemy is COVID-19, but our enemy is also an epidemic of misinformation. A month later, the United Nations upgraded that idea of an infodemic into a disinfodemic, stating COVID-19 has led to a parallel pandemic of disinformation that directly impacts lives and livelihoods around the world. Falsehoods and misinformation have proven deadly and sowed confusion about life-saving personal and policy choices. What we're seeing and experiencing right now in 2020 is an experience that we've never had to deal with before, where the amount of information, misinformation, false information is so rampant that being able to read and write our world has changed. It's a new issue with new skills and requirements. And so what we want to propose here is that what we need is a new pedagogy, a new theoretical lens to make sense of reading and writing. And so what critical media literacy is trying to do is create a new understanding of literacy that, for one part, expands the notion of reading and writing to include images, sounds, advertising, social media, popular culture, as well as print. Because the majority of information that we're engaging with every day is coming through images, sounds, all sorts of multimedia, different ways. It's no longer just words on a page. So we need to help our students be able to critically think about that and also be able to reproduce and create those type of messages. The second part is we need to deepen the ability to critically analyze the relationships between knowledge and power in society, because information is never neutral and it's always either helping or hurting somebody. So critical media literacy involves struggle to challenge the dominant ideologies and the systems that make them appear natural and normal. We're using the words natural and normal inside quotation marks because we don't believe there really is anything that's just natural and normal, that all of our ideas are social constructions. And so we need to be able to help our students to deconstruct these messages and to be able to recognize what are the systems and structures in our society that are being reinforced every day by making something seem like they're normal while other things are marginalized and seem like they're others. So these ideas are not something we're trying to say, okay, this is a new thing you have to now teach on top of everything else. It's actually very much part of everything we're already doing. And as the Common Core lays out, literacy should be taught across all subject areas. We should be embedding technology and media into all things we're doing. We should be teaching about concepts and skills, not just simply memorizing facts. That our pedagogy should be action-based. We should allow students opportunities to demonstrate their learning, right? We should be presenting information with digital media and with visual displays. And all of this should be under the auspices of democracy, that we're building or trying to build responsible citizenship. So the tool that we use primarily for this is a framework. And this is the framework of critical media literacy. It comes with 6 conceptual understandings and 6 questions. And the conceptual understandings is what we teach to our student candidates, our new teachers, that they need to be thinking of ways to build into their teaching that they're already doing to help students understand the social constructivism, that all information is socially constructed by people for different reasons, right? That there are different languages and codes and semiotics, that audiences are going to understand and make sense of any message differently depending on all the different contextual factors, that there's this politics of representation. Anytime information is being represented to us, then there's going to be a bias, there's going to be things omitted and left out. And we need to be able to question what and how is this message and what's missing, what are they not telling us? And we need to understand that a lot of the institutions that are facilitating these messages are based within a capitalist society where profit is often the motive. And finally, we need to be helping them question the social and environmental justice of all information, recognizing that information is never neutral. Somebody's benefiting and someone's being hurt, even when we don't see it. So these are the big ideas that we help guide our teachers with. And on the other side, the questions, that's the methodology that we help them guide their students to use. Students should be using the questions because ultimately that's going to lead them to a deeper understanding of these bigger conceptual understandings. And so here's a URL to that framework that I just showed you. You could also just scan the QR code and it'll give you a one-page document with that if you're interested.
All three of us work at UCLA's teacher education program. And it's a 2-year program in which candidates earn their preliminary credential in the first year and then work as full-time teachers earning their master's in the second year. We place our candidates within schools in the Los Angeles Unified School District and are guided by a particular set of social justice principles. These principles include that we're looking for candidates that are going to be passionate about the content that they teach, that they need to think of teaching that has particular moral, ethical, and political dimensions to it. The importance that to teach, you also need to be very reflective about your prior beliefs and what are your ideas around teaching and learning. The ability to connect theory with practice and to also leverage the assets of the neighborhoods in which they'll be teaching and to how do they leverage those cultural assets into what they teach and what the young people that they're working with. These principles also inform the courses and teaching places that we send them, and particularly the critical media literacy class that our candidates take in the spring quarter. This is a 10-week course that has 2 overarching goals. And the first is to introduce to candidates the critical media literacy framework that will allow them to gauge their own K-12 students to critically analyze media and technology. The analysis is specifically focused on looking at issues of racism, class, gender, sexual orientation, and other identity markers. And the second objective is for our candidates to also learn to create their own alternative media messages. These objectives are met through each of the weeks of the course. So each week we look at a particular concept and idea and ask them at the same time to produce their own alternative media creations. So for example, in week 3, we focus on visual literacy and photography. And amongst the ideas that are explored in the class is the techniques of lighting, composition, and camera angles to construct an image. Candidates are then asked to take 2 pictures of the same subject using the 3 techniques to create a good and bad photograph. The process allows them to see how photographic techniques shape our perceptions by comparing the 2 photographs of the same subject. And so in one subject, one photo, the subject may be lit and bright, and in the other, it might be dark and taken from a lower angle to create a more menacing look. In another activity, we ask our candidates to, for example, to create visual assignments of an illustrated photography. Our students are tasked with creating visual representations of the vocabulary that they're learning. And so what it allows is for students to see how it's also not just fun and engaging, but also center students as creators of knowledge. In another week, we look at ideology and representation, and we look at how media is embedded with particular points of view, and that they either support or challenge diametric hierarchies of power, privilege, and pleasure. Students then create their own memes to be able to challenge these hierarchies. And just one final example is when we ask our students to think beyond simply asking students to create traditional research papers, and instead ask them to think about digital stories, where students combine writing, audio, and images. Students are still doing the traditional research, but they're also including narration, visuals, and images to really think about how this can add a more visual element, but also a more engaging process. So this is just a brief overview of some of the things that we do in the course.
Now that you have a better idea of what critical media literacy is and how it is taught to teachers, I'd like to go over a research study we conducted and discuss with you some of the key findings. The 3 of us teach this course and set out to explore if and how our former students are applying the core concepts and media production skills gained from the course into their own practice. We created an online survey and ended up with 185 responses, of which 53 were from elementary teachers, 132 were from secondary level teachers, in all subjects, including pre and in-service teachers. The survey included a 5-point scale Likert 5-point Likert scale questions, as well as structured, open-ended, qualitative questions, yielding to a mixed method research study. I want to focus on 2 key findings in our study related to critical thinking and student engagement. First, let's look at the link between critical media literacy and critical thinking. Overwhelmingly, teachers report that engaging in critical media literacy promotes critical thinking. On this graph, you can see that in-service respondents, 81% reported that using critical media literacy very frequently and frequently encourages critical thinking, and 61% of pre-service teachers reported very frequently and frequently using critical media literacy to encourage critical thinking. I'd like to highlight that elementary teachers and secondary teachers reported almost identical frequencies in response to how often they use critical media literacy in their classrooms. And I'd like to read a quote by an elementary teacher who uses critical media literacy in her practice. I find it important to bring up critical media literacy, especially in terms of making sure they don't believe, her students, every YouTube video they watch. We've had many meaningful discussions about what can be created for a video shouldn't just be accepted as the truth. For example, the mermaid documentary that came out a few years ago had all my students convinced that they had found a mermaid. It led to an interesting discussion on hoaxes and further reading about Bigfoot and other such stories. Another teacher, English Language and Arts middle school teacher, comments, I love seeing students critically engage with the media they're presented with and begin to ask questions and come to their own conclusions about media. After analyzing multiple types of media, students created their own voice thread using spoken word in order to share their own messages of perseverance. It was incredibly powerful to hear their messages. Now, the second finding that I want to briefly go over is the fact that teachers who engage their students in critical media literacy observed increased student engagement. I have a quote from an 8th grade English teacher, and it reads, incorporating media literacy, her students' entire attitude towards learning shifted, especially the hard-to-reach students. When I did teach a class specifically geared towards media literacy, it was great because students were engaged. They were quick at analyzing images and creating their own. And another quote from a high school science teacher reads, my favorite moments are students exuding pride and passion over the work they're creating that speaks to their perspectives and experiences. Parents proud of their students' media creations. Our research study and our teaching experiences with pre- and in-service teachers both support the findings that critical media literacy increases student engagement and critical thinking skills. We thank you for this opportunity and look forward to your questions and comments about this work. Thank you.
Thank you.